Hello and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. This is a Ukraine war news update segment for the 21st of March 2023. Let's get straight to it. So much news to talk about, so I know these go on too long. Anyway, let's go to our opening gambit. Ukraine released for the Russian losses for the day before. Usual caveats, inaccurate propaganda. I find them indicatively useful and pretty accurate these days, and I try and give you the information to support that, the evidence to support that. There's an uptick in troop losses again from the weekend figures. 960 lost yesterday, which is really heavy losses for the Russians. 15 tanks, 10 APCs, high numbers there, particularly tanks, goodness. 9 artillery systems, and there's a consistent number of artillery systems again today. And I'm going to share something with you. I've talked for the last couple of weeks, and I'm going to clap myself on the back here, but I was just looking at stats thinking there must be a concerted effort to hit artillery systems and MLRS. We've seen an uptick, although there are no MLRS today. We've seen a consistent number of those taken out and artillery pieces taken out on a daily basis. There must be a concerted effort, and it turns out that I think there has been, and I'll just show you that in a second. 7 drones, 12 vehicles and fuel tanks, and 1 piece of special equipment. So pretty bad figures for the Russians. They are taking heavy losses in terms of equipment and troops. There is no doubt about that. Let's try and add a few bits to that. Although there are no aircraft on those figures, this is released yesterday, which is a Russian fighter jet apparently crashing near Donetsk. Quite a significant explosion from that, but we don't actually have footage of it crashing. This is obviously someone's whipped out their camera just after it's crashed and then catches the explosion of, no doubt, the fuel or munition on board. So this is what I was talking about. So Andrew Perpetua said, I've roughly heard the same news as presented here by Volya. So this is a source saying, according to the Russian and Ukrainian military, since mid-February, along the entire line of contact, the armed forces of Ukraine began a real hunt for Russian artillery and MLRS. We are talking about howitzers, anti-tank guns, self-propelled guns, MLRS, multiple launch rocket systems of various types, and heavy flamethrower systems, so things like the TOS 1A. They are destroyed both in positions and in the rear and in artillery parks. According to Russian officers, from February the 10th to March the 18th, the armed forces of Ukraine destroyed or disabled about 150 guns. That's huge. I think that's higher than actually the Ukrainian stats that I've just been giving you have shown. And multiple launch rocket systems. According to Ukrainian officers, about 180 units were destroyed. I don't think that those figures are particularly accurate there, but the real point of sharing this with you is that there appears to be a concerted effort to take out artillery pieces of differing types, and that could well be a case of shaping the battlefield for the counteroffensive to come. It could well be. I think this is supremely sensible. I mean, at the end of the day, most troops lost are lost as a result of artillery. So it's not just about the counteroffensive. It's like looking after your own troops. If you're going to take out any kind of weaponry that is causing you the most damage, yeah, you could talk about troops on the battlefield. But actually, yeah, that's happening in Bakhmut, troop on troop, small arms fire. But really, it's artillery that's killing most people on both sides of this battle. So it's no surprise that the Ukrainians will be targeting artillery, but also it could be a case of preparing for the counteroffensive to come. So I'm happy that my theorizing has been vindicated. Secretary of the National Security Defense Council has denied. So this is Alexei Danilov. Has denied a Politico report that stated 100,000 soldiers had died. I read from that Politico article, and I said to you, I think the author has actually got casualties confused with deaths, and I think that was pretty clear from that. Danilov's come out and said, look, these figures are impossible. Very publicly denied this. Of course, the Russians will say, and anyone could say that could be propaganda. Of course, he's going to deny that. So what is the real figure? I don't know. But I think that Politico author did confuse casualties with actual deaths, and that's a really common mistake to make. And I think it's understandable if that was a mistake that the Ukrainians are putting an answer to that. Okay, 2 Supercam S-350 recon drones were shot down over Mykolaiv Oblast. These are Supercam era S-350s. That 2 of these have been taken out over Mykolaiv, so the Russians are using those drones. Interesting, it's not a drone I've seen before mentioned, so yeah, I wonder what that means. That they're using drones that, I mean, are these commercial drones? I need to look into this. Are these commercial drones that are using? They're not building them themselves. These look like I don't know. Oh no, they are Russian. Yeah, so they're, or at least there are Russian flags in that, so it could be Russian. Sorry, I just haven't had time to look into that. But anyway, those are the drones that have been shot down over Mykolaiv. Apologies for fluffing that up. Talking about drones, quite a bit to say about drones. So 2 armored carriers destroyed by Ukrainian FPV drones. Now, I'm of course it's going to play music. I'm showing these because we are starting, and I've said this over the last few days, we're starting to see many more Ukrainian-built kamikaze drones. And at the same time, we're seeing a real uptick in these drones being used because we've got video evidence of being used. We are seeing a larger number of vehicles being taken out, 15 tanks, 10 APCs today. And you can guarantee that some of those are going to have been taken out by these FPV, that's first person view, kamikaze drones. Not necessarily purpose made ones, such as the Switchblade 600s. These are maybe the Phoenix ones. These often appear to be created by Ukrainians getting hold of FPV racing drones and whacking RPG warheads on them and throwing them into vehicles. We've seen a huge amount of that, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that a bit later because there's some stuff on drones in The Economist, which is well worth sharing. Talking about drones, the biggest news from last night was that Dzhankoy has been hit by what seems to be some drone activity. It's a big explosion that happened at Dzhankoy. And this is what caused, an awful lot of discussion last night. So the claims from the Ukrainians are that Russia was transporting caliber cruise missiles by railway, and a train got hit at the railhead at Dzhankoy. There must be some massive intel leaks in Russia if such info gets leaked to the Ukrainians with the exact time and transport at Dzhankoy. So, if this is caliber cruise missiles being hit, and if that's... You also hear some small arms fire as well, so it appears that these were drones. They were shooting at the drones, then they hit, and some big explosions. So Ukrainians are claiming these are caliber cruise missiles. Some Russians are saying it's not. They don't transport them by rail or so on and so forth. I would on the side that the Ukrainians were trying to hit something, and they did have intel, and it appears something big did explode. So I would err on the side of Ukrainians being slightly more accurate here. But this is pretty significant for a whole bunch of reasons. So you can hear all the air raid sirens going off. I'm playing this because you can hear the sound of the drones in the air, as far as I can tell. Buzzing of the drones in the air. So that is a significant explosion. And then there's small arms fire. And then the sound of the drones dies away. That's just one there. Anyway, Dzhankoy is here in northern Crimea. I've shown you this before because there are a few bases around there. I think there's an airport there. And it is a rail hub. So the rail hub is super important because actually it supplies Sevastopol and Simferopol from Kerch from mainland Russia. That has to go up to Dzhankoy before doglegging down, and it is a bit of a junction, and then goes on to Armansk. Now, if this has been hit, if that was truly cruise missiles there, then and there was a big explosion, then you can imagine that that rail junction has been taken out for some time. So there's not just about hitting the cruise missiles and taking them out, it's about taking the rail junction out. So I think it's hugely important. Here is definitely a gas-powered smaller drone flying at low level, in effect a Ukrainian version of the Shahed 136, says Incident Technical, with a reference to this just a few frames worth of video footage here showing some kind of drone activity and what debris from the Ukrainian drones that struck Russian-occupied Crimea in Dzhankoy last night. So maybe some of them were taken out, or I don't know whether some of them taken out, whether only one exploded or whatever. I'm sure details will be forthcoming. Well, I hope so over the next few days. Find out what really took place. But initially, it does look like cruise missiles are blown up at a railway junction, and that will have caused some serious damage. If so, if it wasn't cruise missiles, then something else big has blown up. Russia on fire, the big flaming restaurant here in Moscow. Was this a result of anything to do with the war? Don't know. I think this number might represent like the 112th big fire. So Russia on fire here. So if that is, I mean, you can see I'm reporting these on a daily basis. Just fire seems to be a real thorn in the side for the Russians. Okay, going on to odds and sods. Simonian, who is a Russian propagandist, talking here about Maria Lvova-Belova, who is one of the two people having been given an arrest warrant from the ICC, International Criminal Court, Putin and the children's minister, children's rights minister, I think. So there's been all this blowback against the ICC, as you can imagine, from within Russia, and particularly from the propagandists. Here, the claim from Margarita Simonian is that these were children that nobody wanted, and so therefore Russia were right to take on these children, to adopt them out, and so on and so forth. She took children from an orphanage, children whom nobody wanted, who were abandoned. Now The Hague will be chasing after her for this. And as Vlada Knowlton here says, no, Marge, she kidnapped children after you murdered their loved ones. Their relatives wanted them, their friends wanted them, their country wanted them, and in some cases, their parents were still alive and wanted them. But irrespective of these children, like even if they were genuinely in orphanages and maybe some neglected children, you don't go into other countries and just take those children and then ship them back to your own country. They're like, gee whiz, it's just terrible. Okay, moving on. Moscow. So I reported to you how the Kremlin had changed the conscription rules for ages. I think it was 18 to 27. It's now 21 to is it 30? Something like that, 21 to 31. They've shifted the ages so that if people have exemptions for being at university, they've shifted it so that as soon as they finish university, they can get them. So it's now 21. Okay, you want to go and do your education at uni, go and do that, but we'll enlist you afterwards. Anyway, Moscow students are reportedly being handed mobilization orders along with their diplomas literally at the very minute that their exemption from military service expires. This is happening at the same time that Russia is reportedly seeking 400,000 new soldiers. There are reports from independent Russian news outlets that in order to get their diplomas, they have to go to the enlistment office first. You won't get your diploma. Thanks for doing that. Thanks for being here for 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, however long. Well done. You're at university. Excellent. You wanna get your diploma, right? Go and sign up first, and then you get your diploma. And of course, there are ramifications here with expertise being taken out of the economy, etc., etc., etc. Anyway, this Chris O thread is well worth looking into. I'll probably look into this a little bit later in an extra video, but it's just interesting that news is coming out. Right. Our good friend Eagle Gherkin, clearly has a death wish. So he's now starting to say really critical things directly of Putin. And this is an interesting situation because he's probably in a position where he can just about get away with it. Here's a hyper-nationalist Russian military blogger who used to be in charge of troops in 2014, little green men on the front lines in the Donbass, who has a huge following. If Russia sweep in and arrest him, or the Kremlin arrests him, or he ends up falling out of a window, he's too famous for that, arguably. So they are letting him get away with being really skating on very thin ice. Will they shut him down at some point soon? It's got to be close to being that, because he's being that explicit. Vladimir Putin, shut up so that we are not ashamed of having such a president, he says. And then it goes on to say, are such publications extremists? After all, they shape the holy faith of Russians that we have a state where all citizens are equal and the authorities are strictly patriotic. So he's saying that this is not the case. And the fact that the vast majority of our oligarchs didn't lift a finger to help the front, is it really necessary to put it on public display? So he's now having to go at oligarchs for their children, or for them not being sent to the front line. They seem to be exempt. There's that image of the first two front rows of Putin's recent speech on the anniversary of the war, or near then, to the Russian peoples. And in the first two front rows, all those important dignitaries, not one of their children have been sent to the front line. Isn't this a military state secret? I'm waiting for clarification from the president and his press secretary, whose daughter lives in France and son lives in London. All pointed, very, very pointed. And of course, their children, interesting that their children are educated abroad, often going to get jobs abroad, live abroad. It's like, if Russia is that wonderful, what are you doing that for? Anyway, Gherkin, skating on very thin ice for sure. In Crimea, I almost reported this yesterday, but didn't. In Crimea, 4 school children were detained for tearing up the Russian flag and trampling on it. Now, this is pretty minor stuff. They get a tiny little flag and then struggle to rip it up, doing a bit of graffiti. This is pretty minor stuff, really, but they are definitely showing disrespect to Russia and the Russian flag. For me, what's heartening here is you've got children, the young in Crimea, know what's going on. This is a reflection that, do you know what? Not the whole of Crimea is pro-Russian, and you've got children who are definitely against the Russian aggressors here, and that gives me hope. But I hope that these guys don't get into too much trouble. They have been detained. Right, military aid. US, I'm a little bit disappointed. I was hoping the US would react to the Reaper drone being taken down with a really big military aid announcement. But this is great. Don't get me wrong. This is absolutely fabulous. But it's a pretty typical military aid package. HIMARS ammo, 155 shells, 25mm ammo, HARM missiles, so anti-radiation missiles shot from planes to take out things like radar installations and anti-aircraft systems. 81mm and 60mm mortar systems and rounds, 84 anti-tank guns, grenade launchers, small arms and associated ammunition, demolition munitions and equipment for obstacle clearing, mine clearing equipment, super important for doing offensives, of course, heavy fuel tankers, thermal imagery systems, optics and laser rangefinders, riverine patrol boats, testing and diagnostic equipment to support vehicle maintenance and repair, spare parts. Super important, just not the like ATACM size, fingers crossed that they might be getting that kind of thing. Along with that, they're being trained Ukrainians on the Striker. So this is a gun mounted on top of a Striker APC. I don't know whether that makes it an IFV. I don't know. Let us say. Striker are going to be used, one assumes, in the upcoming counteroffensive. Talking about IFVs, here are the German Marders that are on their way to Ukraine, says German Defense Minister Boris Pistorius. These look like they have ATGMs loaded on top, and they look in pretty good nick as well. Anti-tank guided missile systems on top. Correct me if I'm wrong. And if you didn't believe that, here's someone on a train going past Marders, except these particular Marders have some kind of autocannon on top. There will be different variations of Marder's going, quite a lot of them by the looks of it. Happy days. And indeed, talking about those sort of systems you might see on top of things like Marder's, in this case, Humvees or Bradleys, people are wondering what version of the tow will be on top of the Bradley, or in this case, Humvee. What Ukraine Weapons Tracker reports, and this gets Thomas C. Tyner very excited. I do. He's a former artilleryman. I've done many threads of his. Check out my extras. Ukraine Weapons Tracker says photos of Ukrainian soldier firing an M41A7 tow Humvee mounted ITAS, which allow us to confirm one of the tow types supplied by the US to Ukraine. We see a tow 2B series missile, a very capable top attack variant, able to destroy almost any Russian vehicle. So when you've got your Bradleys and your Humvees being able to take out the very best Russian tanks, you imagine that Russia might be in a little bit of trouble in the upcoming counteroffensive. The Ministry of Defence, this is Norway, released pictures of the transfer of 8 Leopard 2A4 tanks, 4 armoured recovery vehicles, BREM, spare parts and ammunition to Ukraine. It's actually these BREM that are super important, the armoured recovery vehicles that I've been talking about. If you're going to do a counteroffensive, you need excavators, mine clearers, bridge layers. All of these types of vehicles are as important as your tanks, your main battle tanks, because your main battle tanks can't get across a river on their own. They can't go through a minefield on their own, so on and so forth. And if they do get damaged, you need to recover them so they can get fixed up. Those recovery vehicles are super, super important. In fact, Norway has the list that Oryx has done of what Norway has delivered has been updated with a 1 Mamba Arthur counter battery radar system, 2 armored recovery vehicles, 2 armored engineering vehicles, Scania P9, 2 P92 trucks, Scania P113 trucks, 113 trucks. So lots of things going there, not just those tanks and ARVs that I mentioned. Okay. Denmark plans to train the military of the armed forces in demining, as well as the use of Caesar artillery installations. So Caesars are your French self-propelled guns that have a really good range and they can shoot and scoot really quickly. They're excellent. Denmark has given, instead of receiving a bunch that they had ordered from France, they're actually sending them, they're getting France to send them straight to Ukraine, but they're going to be involved in training, which is good. Excellent stuff. And then we go on to this very interesting article in The Economist. So Shashank Joshi says Starlink now uses geofencing to block the use of its terminals, not only above Russian-occupied territory inside Ukraine, but also, according to a Ukrainian military intel source, over water, and when the receiver is moving at speeds above 100 kilometers per hour. Right, Starlink is one of the most important components of the Ukrainian armed forces for both communications, well, all sorts of different comms, direct communications with each other, like troops and command or whatever, and then drones with command and the controlling of the drones and so on and so forth. Now, Elon Musk, who owns Starlink, has very controversially said, right, you're not using it for offensive means. It's like, how do you define what's offensive, what's defensive? By attacking the Russians, you're defending your country. So there is no offensive. When the Ukrainians are doing anything, it is actually, even if it's an offensive, it is an offensive in defending their country. So you can argue that everything Ukraine do is defensive. They wouldn't be doing any of this if they hadn't been invaded. So and I know some of you love Elon Musk, whatever, but I am super bloody angry about Starlink being ring-fenced in this way and not being allowed to be used to its full potential, because it's, if you ask people like Michael Kaufman says, the single most important thing that Ukrainians have, Starlink. It's like Starlink. People talk about it all the time. It is that important. And all it looks like is that Musk is going on a kind of Russian appeasement drive here. Anyway, this article is super important to read. So I'm going to read this to you. Mikhailo Fedorov, the 32-year-old deputy prime minister responsible for both Ukraine's drone program and its digital transformation, says a turning point may be coming faster than people think. Big news coming. A number of changes are about to make a big impact, he says. The army has completed a big restructuring, establishing 60 new attack drone squadrons, at least one in every brigade, with separate staff and commanders. Now, if you know anything about United 24, United 24 is this. Mark Hamill was involved with it. Loads of famous people involved with it have been raising money for drones. They've raised like hundreds of millions of dollars. Where's all that money go? What I wonder. I've been wondering where all these drones are. Like, there are lots of drones on the front line, yes, but they're screaming out for more. And with that amount of money, you should be able to just give them as many drones as you like. I don't know whether there's a lot of those drones being put into these kind of squadrons ready for a counter-offensive. At least one in every brigade with separate staff and commanders. This is a first reform of its kind anywhere in the world. Ukraine's military doctrine has been updated to include classified guidelines on drone use. The Defense Ministry has created a new board to coordinate the work of drone producers. There's been a drive to deregulate, removing import and certification barriers, and this month is marked by the launch of a new military cluster venture designed to link Ukrainian military tech with international companies and capital. So I think, United 24, I don't know, might be playing a part in that. A defense industry insider speaking on condition of anonymity confirms that the army is due to gain significant and high-tech capacity in the coming weeks and months. That said, it will still struggle against the Russians, he cautions. Their own Iranian-designed drones have tormented Ukrainian cities since the start of winter. The war is also testing drone technologies as never before over a large contested airspace and against sophisticated electronic warfare systems. Only a few military systems can perform well. Quote, the Russians are very, very good at what they do, the industry source says. They are performing black magic in electromagnetic defense. They can jam frequencies, spoof GPS, send a drone to the wrong altitude so that it simply drops out of the sky. The threat from ground-based air defences means that Ukrainian reconnaissance drones struggle to see more than 15 kilometres behind Russian lines, says one expert with recent experience in observing drone operations. Right, this is a Starlink bit. At one early stage, the Ukrainians appeared to pin hopes for controlling drones behind Russian lines on Elon Musk's Starlink satellites, which work at frequencies and in numbers that Russian systems struggle to jam. A naval drone attack on Russia's Black Sea fleet in October reportedly made good use of this gap. But Mr. Musk, apparently worried about the escalatory effect of such moves, has stepped in where Russian technology proved unable to. Starlink now uses geofencing to block the use of its terminals, not only above Russian-occupied territory inside Ukraine, but also, according to a Russian military intelligence source, over water and when the receiver is moving at speeds above 100 kilometers an hour. You put it on a boat at sea and it will simply stop working, he says. So Ukraine's drone developers now use a range of more expensive communication systems with multiple systems often on the same vehicle. The success of the attack on February the 28th in getting so close to Moscow suggests that Ukraine may be getting close to a solution that works. So they don't have a solution that works yet, but they may be getting close to a solution. This is as a result of Starlink geofencing, which means that basically geofencing means that it will, on a map, right, the drone will only work in certain areas. So as soon as it goes over the front line, Starlink will stop working and it will just drop out of the sky or this or that, or it won't be able to find its way around, whatever. Or if it goes over 100 kilometers an hour, or if it's at sea or whatever, the Starlink stops working. And that is effectively that is Elon Musk helping the Russians. And that's the way I'm going to see it. And if you love Elon Musk, you won't see it in that way because you'll defend him to the hilt. But this is helping the Russians. There's no doubt about it. This is an explicit move to help the Russians, and I absolutely decry it. Anyway, moving on. Geopolitics. Hungary seems to be hungry for appeasing Russia, hungry for love with Russia. Hungary has blocked the European Union member states from issuing a joint statement about an international arrest warrant against Russian President Vladimir Putin. As Nell Report says, I'm genuinely sick and tired of Hungary. It seems to be doing its best to mess things up for Ukraine, that's for sure. Well, obviously, the biggest bit of news, though, is Xi Jinping has met Putin in Moscow. Putin has called him a dear friend. I don't know what to make of it, really. Apparently, Xi told Putin that it is true that both of our countries share the same or similar goals. I like that vague, not quite fully on board. We have exerted efforts for the prosperity of our respective countries. We can cooperate and work together to achieve our goals, he says. And CNN reports China in recent weeks has attempted to portray itself as an aspiring broker of peace, calling for ceasefire and peace talks in a vaguely worded position paper released last month. And that is what I think Putin says is going to work with with China towards, like that peace proposal, but pretty vague. Quote, and this is from Antony Blinken, US diplomat, Secretary of State. China feels no responsibility to hold the Kremlin accountable for the atrocities committed in Ukraine. And instead of even condemning them, it would rather provide diplomatic cover for Russia to continue to commit those very crimes. So the US are pretty damning. On Monday at the Kremlin, the Chinese leader said developing relations with its biggest neighbor was a strategic choice on the basis of Beijing's own fundamental interests and the prevailing trends of the world. He called for the two countries to strengthen coordination and collaboration on multilateral platforms such as the UN to boost their respective national development and rejuvenation, according to the readout from the China's foreign ministry, which is interesting. So it's like we need to get together in the UN and work together basically to shift the power, the locus of power from the US hegemony over to a BRICS-based hegemony, certainly a Russia-Chinese. But this is what I have to say about the whole thing, right? And this to me is kind of, I think, all you need to know. I think China, Xi Jinping's clever, right? And it's all about power. China are going to be walking in, Xi Jinping will walk into Moscow knowing that he is in a power position. He can screw Russia for whatever he wants, and he will be able to get it. Russia are on their knees, realistically speaking. China are their savior, their oriental savior. And like the Eastern angelic figure that can come along and solve all of Russia's problems. But in knowing that that's what Putin thinks, Xi Jinping is in a position to say, okay, what can I get out of this? Yeah, you want China, you want us to do X, Y, and Z. You need us, you want us to, and we know that they're doing this because look at what they've done with the oil, which is, yeah, we'll buy you oil, but we'll only pay this much for it. We'll buy loads of it, but we'll only pay this much for it. And Russia like, okay, please, help us. And it's going to be the same here. It's like Xi Jinping will say, yeah, we'll help you. Oh, by the way, we're wondering if we can have this, we can have that. Oh, and we can have this. So I don't know what's going on behind closed doors, but you can bet your bottom dollar that China will come out of that much better off than Russia. Much better off. And you know, you can't blame them. Xi Jinping is in such an amazing position, which is like, he knows that America are really afraid of China and everyone's jostling around, and he is your number one human in the world, really. Most powerful person in the world, because he can dictate, you know, how what goes on with America and how they react, but he can dictate to Russia what's going on, and then all these other people like the BRICS. You know, yes, the power hasn't shifted from the US to China, but as a human being, like it's him and Biden, surely, but Xi Jinping is in a supremely powerful position. Interesting, right at the center of everything. And just a last couple of things. Japan have announced Kishida is going to be popping over to Kiev for talks with Zelensky, and that's a surprise announcement. It's just come through. So good stuff. And just, this is how to do this is the Russian ambassador on Australian TV. This is how to start an interview.
Ambassador Pavlovsky, welcome to 7:30.
Good day.
Ambassador, you're here in Australia enjoying the benefits of a free and open society. How do you live with yourself representing the repressive, dictatorial Putin regime? You find that funny?
What I find funny is your way to start an interview.
Pretty straight question.
Yes, too straight. So let me tell you, first of all, that I never had problems living in my country.
Ambassador Pavlovsky.
Lovely, absolutely lovely. It's just like, just straight up. How do you feel working for a moral monster? Bosh. Yeah, no, it's a pretty straight question. How do you feel? So anyway, that's how to do an interview. That's the news for today. Please like, subscribe, and share. Sorry, it's yet another long one. Too much is happening. Anyway, check out for my frontline update coming soon and my extra coming later today. All the ways you can support the channel are in the description below. Really appreciate all of your support. Speak soon.